In the midst of World War II, while the Allied forces fought against fascism, one of the most tragic and avoidable famines in modern history was unfolding not on a battlefield, but in the fields of Bengal, British India. Millions of lives were lost, not due to drought, crop failure, or natural disaster, but due to a deadly combination of colonial wartime exploitation, and indifference from the highest office in Britain. This is the story of the Bengal Famine of 1943, a famine that killed over 3 million people, and the man many historians now hold responsible, Winston Churchill. Before the famine, Bengal was one of the richest and most fertile provinces of British India. The Ganges Delta provided an abundance of rice, jute, and other essential crops. Yet, beneath the surface of prosperity lay a fragile economy built on British extraction. The British East India Company had established control in Bengal after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Over the next 180 years, colonial policies would transform Bengal's agricultural system from self-sustaining farming to cash crop production, export-oriented and vulnerable. Rice, the staple of Bengal's diet, was grown and consumed locally, but by 1940, the economic structure of Bengal had become deeply intertwined with the imperial war machine. Everything was redirected for the benefit of Britain's war effort. When World War II erupted, India, still under British rule, was immediately pulled into the conflict. Calcutta became a strategic hub for British operations in Southeast Asia. But this global war would have devastating local consequences. By 1942, the Japanese had swept through Southeast Asia. Burma, a key supplier of rice to Bengal, fell into Japanese hands. The rice imports from Burma stopped abruptly, cutting off nearly 15% of Bengal's rice supply. Meanwhile, Churchill's war cabinet viewed India not as a nation of people, but as a base of resources, grain, labor, and infrastructure to be drained for the imperial cause. To deny supplies to the advancing Japanese, the British enacted a scorched earth policy in Bengal known as the denial policy. Boats were destroyed, rice stocks confiscated, and people displaced, crippling internal transport and trade. Winston Churchill personally ordered that no extra food shipments should be made to India. His reasoning: the war effort in Europe and the Mediterranean was more important. He even said, if there is a famine in India, why isn't Gandhi dead yet? Churchill's words weren't just dismissive, they were deadly. By the summer of 1943, signs of severe food shortages emerged. Prices skyrocketed. Hoarding became rampant. The poorest began to die. Reports from Bengal's villages told of skeletal children, women selling their babies for a handful of rice, and families feeding on wild grass. Yet the British government continued to export rice and wheat from India for its soldiers and allies. Grain silos were full in other parts of India, but trains were diverted for military use. Relief was blocked. At the height of the famine, Calcutta, the capital of Bengal, became a city of walking corpses. Photographs from the Times show rows of the dead and dying, lying by the roadside, unattended. Local leaders, including Sabuas, Chandra Bose, and the Indian National Congress, pleaded for British action. Mahatma Gandhi wrote to Churchill warning of mass death. Churchill's response: he called Indians a people who breed like rabbits and claimed they had brought the famine upon themselves. Even as famine reports poured in, the British government attempted to control the narrative. Censorship was imposed on Indian newspapers. Photographers were restricted. News of the famine was suppressed in Britain. Meanwhile, official statements in Parliament denied the scale of the disaster. When Member of Parliament Amory tried to raise the alarm, Churchill brushed him aside. What's worse, grain exports from India actually increased during the peak of the famine. Churchill prioritized feeding British troops and stockpiling for Europe over saving Indian lives. The Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, warned the British cabinet that millions would die unless immediate aid was sent. But Churchill refused to divert ships. He blamed the Indian people. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion. Churchill allegedly said, even when Canada, Australia, and the U.S. offered to send grain to India, Churchill's cabinet refused. What? Because they said it would disrupt British shipping schedules. By early 1944, the famine had reached catastrophic levels. Over 3 million people died, many from starvation, others from disease exacerbated by malnutrition. Bodies were left unburied. Entire villages disappeared. The social fabric of Bengal was torn apart. Families disintegrated. Women and children suffered the most. Children who survived became orphans. Women were forced into prostitution for a few ounces of rice. There was no drought. There was no flood. There was food available in India, but Bengal was starved deliberately. British economist John Maynard Keynes later called it the most preventable famine in history. In 1945, as World War II ended, India lay broken. The Bengal famine had exposed the brutality of colonial rule like never before. Yet Churchill, rather than facing accountability, was hailed as a hero across the West. His role in the famine was buried in the shadows of his wartime victory. The Indian people, however, remembered. The famine became a rallying cry for independence. It revealed that the British Empire would sacrifice Indian lives to maintain its power. In 1947, just 4 years after the famine, India achieved independence. But Churchill remained unapologetic until his death. His defenders argued that wartime decisions were complex, but historians like Marta Saray Mukherjee, author of Churchill's Secret War, have uncovered a mountain of evidence that shows the famine was not only avoidable but allowed, even enabled by imperial policy. Today, Churchill is remembered in the West as the man who saved Britain from Nazi tyranny. Statues, streets, and schools bear his name. But in India, Bangladesh, and among many historians, he is remembered differently. The Bengal famine is one of many colonial atrocities that the British Empire has never formally apologized for. Was Churchill a great wartime leader? Perhaps. But he was also a leader who oversaw a genocide in India, famine created by racism, war priorities, and imperial arrogance. In 2019, when asked about Churchill's legacy, Indian politician Shashi Tharoor said, "He has as much blood on his hands as the worst genocidal dictators of the 20th century. The Bengal famine was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made tragedy in one of the darkest chapters in the history of the British Empire." Winston Churchill may have defeated Hitler, but in the rice fields of Bengal, his policies starved millions. Today, as we revisit this history, let us remember those who died not just as victims of famine, but as casualties of empire. Their voices may have been silenced by hunger, but their memory demands justice. It's time the world recognizes the full legacy of colonialism, one famine, one empire, and one man at a time.